see that some of you are working on Module 4 already, so I hope you're enjoying that as you are starting to develop your own lesson plan using all of the things that you've learned just in the past 2 weeks. So by the end of this week, you will have a fully fleshed out lesson plan. But I do want to give you some brief feedback on Activity 3.2 from Module 3, and I'll also include feedback from Activity 3.3 as well. So for Activity 3.2, that was where you got some very short lesson snippets and you were asked how aligned they were and what you would do to change it to make it more aligned. In general, you all did very well on Lesson A. That was the one where the objectives were to identify the different parts of a scholarly article and identify examples of when citation was needed. And there were some good suggestions there, but I do want to say that you should remember backwards design. We had a few people suggest that plagiarism be included in the content and activities because that was the assessment, and to add it to the objectives. However, since plagiarism was not in the objectives, really the solution there isn't to add plagiarism into the objectives, it's to take plagiarism out of the assessment because it's not a fair assessment of the actual objectives. So in backwards design, we start with the objectives. So if there's no plagiarism in the objectives, then it doesn't belong anywhere. So make sure that when you're thinking about your lessons that backwards design, we start with the objectives and then everything needs to fall into place for that. In Lesson B, many of you suggested that the only change for that one was to add an assessment for learning Objective 1, finding the source. So Lesson B, the goal for that one was for students to leave with strategies for finding and evaluating information. So you noted that we needed to add an assessment for that first objective of finding because that was missing. However, if we add an assessment without any supporting content and activities, it's not only not a meaningful assessment, it's also not fair to the students. So even though we have an objective that students will find a source and then we add in some assessment that will assess if they can find a source or not, we also need to make sure that we add in content and activities to help the students get from that objective to the assessment in a meaningful way. Because how can you expect them to do something if you first haven't given them the tools on how to learn how to do it? So remember that alignment is not just about aligning the objectives and the assessment, it's about aligning everything else in between as well. And then Lesson C was related to annotated bibliographies, and a lot of you missed that we were missing an assessment for Objective 1. So you want to make sure that we get that assessment in there and that the assessment addresses all of the objectives or that there are multiple assessments to get at each objective individually. For Lesson C, there were also a few suggestions that we have students find an annotated bibliography or an annotation, and that is really outside the scope of the objectives. The objectives, again, were to outline the structure of an annotated bibliography and to explain the difference between a summative and annotation and an evaluative annotation. So in neither one of those objectives do we want the students to be able to find something. So adding in an assessment that asks them to find an annotated bibliography or an annotation does not align at all. And also, it's incredibly difficult. People don't really publish annotated bibliographies or annotations. That's really an exercise that we ask students to do as they are growing into scholars and learning to engage with the literature. So remember that not everything that we teach in libraries needs to lead to students finding something. I noticed in a lot of the lessons that you've been revising and the topics that you're working on developing a lesson plan for this week are on finding, and I know that that's the most popular thing that librarians do, but that doesn't have to be the only thing that we do. So don't feel like you have to get that finding objective or activity into every single lesson because sometimes that's not what they need. There's much more to information literacy on that. So some other notes. Activity 3.2 was pretty good. I think that's all I have feedback for that. Activity 3.3, that was the lesson planning template. That was generally good. I would have liked to see some more bonus elements included in your templates. Many of you just included those basic elements, which are fine. but think about how one or two of those bonus elements could be useful to you as well. I'd also like to see a little bit more personalization. The point here was not for you to take a template and just copy and paste it and call it your own. I really want you guys to personalize these templates. Make sure that it's in a format and a structure that works for you. Changing the font isn't really personalizing it. Let's make sure that you put it in a way that is going to work for you and your students and your library, and not just copy the templates that are already there. Those are some good templates, because I made one of them, but that's my template. It's a template for me. So, and that works for me and what I need. And what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you. If it does, great. But I'd really like you to try to personalize it at least a little bit and see how that goes. Also, don't try to overhaul all of your work right now. I've gotten messages and emails from a lot of people saying that you're completely redoing the lesson that you're doing tomorrow. Um, don't do that. You're gonna get stressed out. You're gonna add a lot of extra work onto your plate that maybe you don't need to do. I'm so glad that you all are learning a lot and implementing changes into your lessons, but it doesn't need to happen overnight. So we're working on building a student-centered aligned lesson plan this week, but don't go and try to fix all of your other lessons right now. After this course, try, or even throughout the rest of this course, try one thing at a time, one lesson, one part of a lesson, or one type of change, and maybe you try to incorporate one new thing each week. Take baby steps. This is a lot, and for many of you, this is a complete mind shift. It's completely changing what you're doing in the classroom, which is exactly what I want you to get out of this, but don't try to do it overnight. It's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be a lot of work, and you don't need to do it that quickly. Give yourself some time, and don't kill yourself doing this. And also really great conversations in the discussion board, so keep those up. What you put into this course will reflect what you get out of it, so the more time you take to think, reflect, and write about your thoughts and experiences in those forums, the more you'll get out of it. So I'm really enjoying reading those and engaging in those conversations, so keep it up. There will be some more discussion boards this week in Module 4, so I hope you enjoy those, and I hope you enjoy Week 3, Module 4, and I will talk to some of you all soon. Have a good week.